At exactly 2 a.m., I was unlocking the front door of my own mountain cabin when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number, a woman I'd never spoken to before accusing me of breaking into the very house I owned. 10 minutes later, flashing lights lit up the driveway as the cops pulled in, and that's when things started spiraling into the strange. At first, I thought she was just another nosy HOA type with too much free time and not enough boundaries. But the way she watched me, like I was a suspect in a crime she couldn't quite prove, gave me a chill I couldn't shake. Ever had a neighbor who acted like they were guarding a classified government bunker? Drop your weirdest HOA story in the comments. I actually read every single one. The drive from Sacramento to the cabin usually takes 4 hours, but that night it felt endless, like the road itself didn't want me to arrive. I'm Lucas Sterling, 35, and I work in computer security for the federal government. The last 6 months had been a relentless blur, patching system vulnerabilities, back-to-back 18-hour shifts, surviving on coffee, stress, and sheer willpower. All I wanted was a hot shower and a long, uninterrupted sleep, at least 12 hours. The cabin sits in a quiet cluster of lakeside homes, maybe 20 in total, the kind of place where people smile, wave, and sometimes bring over homemade cookies. But not this time, not even close. I pulled into my driveway at 2 a.m. sharp, headlights slicing through the forest shadows. Everything looked untouched, exactly as I'd left it half a year ago. I slid my key into the lock. It clicked smoothly. Then the phone rang again. Unknown caller. I nearly ignored it. Who calls at that hour? But something made me answer. Hello, I said, still fumbling with the keys in the dark. Her voice cut through the night like nails on a chalkboard, laced with the tone of an angry voicemail. Sharp, demanding, and completely out of left field. Who are you? Why are you coming home? At this hour? She barked, so loud and abrupt that I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. Excuse me, who is this? I asked, honestly baffled. Who calls a homeowner at 2 a.m. to question them like they're breaking in? I'm Denise Harrow, HOA president, she snapped. You're violating quiet hours after 10 p.m. I've been watching, and this is completely unacceptable behavior for our community. I stood there in stunned silence, still in my own driveway, key in hand, trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was being scolded by a total stranger for the crime of coming home late. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my cool. Look, I've dealt with difficult personalities before, occupational hazard in federal cybersecurity, but this woman was operating on a whole different frequency. Ma'am, I'm sorry if I caused any disturbance, I began calmly. I'm Lucas Sterling. I own this cabin. I just returned from a long business trip, but she cut me off like a buzzsaw. I've never seen you before. Prove it, she snapped. Prove it. I was standing at my own front door, key already in the lock, and this woman was demanding proof that I belonged there. I understand your concern, I replied, voice steady despite the irritation creeping in. But I can assure you, I'm the legal owner of this property. I work for the federal government, and my job often requires me to travel at odd hours. Silence followed. For a brief second, I thought maybe she'd gotten the message and backed off. But no, I was very, very wrong. I don't care who you claim to work for, she snapped, her voice now fully dialed into hostile mode. This is a peaceful neighborhood, and we don't tolerate suspicious activity. You could be anyone, a burglar, a criminal, anything. I'm calling the police right now. I looked down at myself in disbelief. Sweatpants, a tired face, travel bag slung over my shoulder. Hardly the profile of a home invader. Then she hung up, leaving me standing on my own porch, staring at my phone like I'd just been dropped into a parallel universe where returning to your own house at night was a felony. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just overly cautious. But there was something about her voice, sharp, cold, confrontational from the very first word, that screamed this wasn't just neighborly concern. This was something personal, something off. 10 minutes later, I was finally inside, digging through bags trying to find a towel and salvage what was left of my night, when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, and there they were, 2 cops on my porch, both wearing the unmistakable look of people who'd rather be anywhere else. They seemed tired, probably pulled away from real emergencies for this nonsense. I opened the door, ready to explain, but before I could even speak, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the street. A woman in her 50s, wrapped in a red silk. robe and slippers, power walking toward my cabin like she was delivering a royal decree. That had to be Denise Harrow, and judging by the smug smile plastered across her face, she was absolutely reveling in the chaos. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice now drenched in phony politeness. "This person claims to own the house, but arrived at a very suspicious hour. With all the recent break-ins, I thought it best to be cautious. He could be a burglar for all we know." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Burglar, really? But I reminded myself the officers were just doing their job, so I stayed calm and respectful. "Officers, I'm sorry you had to come. Out here," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm Lucas Sterling, and this is my cabin. I just returned from a work trip," I explained, and the younger officer gave me a sympathetic nod, clearly no stranger to dealing with overzealous neighbors who treat HOA rules like federal law. "Sir, we just need to verify your identity, and we'll be on our way. Do you have any identification?" he asked. That's when things took a sudden and dramatic turn. I reached into my wallet, and instead of pulling out a driver's license or credit card, I handed him my federal ID. The beam of his flashlight caught the badge just right, and I watched both officers' expressions shift instantly, from casual and slightly annoyed to alert and respectfully professional. The atmosphere changed like someone had flipped a switch. "Sorry, sir. We didn't realize," the older officer began, but I raised a hand and cut him off gently. "No problem. Officers, you're just doing your job, and I respect that. Community safety matters." But the real show was behind them. Denise Harrow, who had been standing off to the side with a smug grin like she was about to witness my public humiliation, suddenly went pale. And not just embarrassed pale, ghost white, like someone had yanked the rug out from under her reality. She had been so sure of herself, certain that she was about to win some imagined battle. But when she saw that ID and the way the officers responded, her face drained of all color in seconds. "Ma'am," I said, turning to her with calm authority, "I'm Lucas Sterling, the legal owner of this lakeside cabin. I work in computer security for the federal government. My job demands travel at odd hours, but I have every right to be here, anytime, any day." The officers offered another quick apology and started heading back to their patrol car, satisfied that everything checked out, but Denise didn't move. She wasn't embarrassed, she was frozen. Her eyes locked onto me, unblinking, as if I had just revealed a weapon, not an ID badge. And that reaction, it wasn't confusion or shame. It was fear, real fear. And I didn't know why. Or maybe deep down I did. But I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet, that I mean. I'd just proven beyond a doubt that I was exactly who I said I was. Federal credentials, officers satisfied, case closed, right? The drama should have ended there, but one look at Denise's face told me otherwise. As the police car pulled away and I stepped back inside, I glanced out the window and saw her still standing in the middle of the street, wrapped in that red silk robe, just staring at my cabin like it was harboring state secrets. She didn't move, didn't turn back toward her house, just stood there, watching, like she knew something I didn't, or worse, like she thought I was part of something. I assumed flashing my federal ID would end the madness, but her eyes said this was just the start, and I had a sinking feeling. I'd walked into a mess way bigger than a noise complaint. The next morning, I woke up to find 17 unread emails in my inbox, all from the same sender. Not even kidding. 17 separate emails, each one a meticulously worded violation report. The first one nearly made me laugh out loud. Violation notice number 1. Vehicle parked 2.3 feet from curb instead of regulation 2.5 feet. I had to reread it just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She had actually measured the distance from my tires to the curb and cited me over 0.2 of a foot. Who even owns a curb measuring device? But clearly, Denise did, and she had both the tools and the time. Then came violation notice number 2. Outdoor lighting exceeds acceptable brightness levels for mountain atmosphere preservation. My porch light, a standard issue, Home Depot special that barely lit the steps. Apparently, it was too aggressive for the delicate mountain atmosphere. As I scrolled through the rest of her absurd complaints, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly she was trying to achieve, and why she seemed so dead set on driving me out before I'd even unpacked. Then came violation notice number 3, lawn maintenance below HOA standards. Grass height inconsistent with community guidelines. I actually laughed out loud at that one, because it was February and the entire lawn was covered in snow. What grass was she even referring to? At that point, I started to wonder if Denise had completely lost it or if this was her twisted way of reasserting control after the humiliation she faced the night before. By the time I reached the 12th email, yes, I was counting, it became painfully clear this wasn't about community guidelines or preserving the neighborhood's charm. This was about control. Pure, obsessive, targeted control. One message jumped out. Urgent, unauthorized surveillance equipment detected on property. Remove immediately or face legal action. Now this one didn't feel like the others. The lighting and parking violations were annoying, sure, but this one felt different. It felt scared, like she actually believed I was watching her. Which was ironic, because the only thing with a clear view of her house from my cabin was a 30-foot pine tree. I didn't even have a basic security system installed, unless she thought the porch light doubled as a spy cam. But why would she be paranoid about surveillance? What could she possibly be doing that made her fear someone was watching? That thought stuck with me, so I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, partly to clear my head, partly to get a better read on this strange little community I'd dropped into. The air was crisp, the snow sparkled underfoot, and everything was almost too quiet. Eerily calm for a place wrapped in so much tension. I was admiring the stillness and the mountain view when a voice behind me broke the silence. "You must be the new neighbor everyone's talking about." I turned around and saw a sweet-looking woman in her 70s, bundled in a thick winter coat, holding a thermos that smelled unmistakably like hot chocolate. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile, the complete opposite of Denise Harrow's sharp edges. And cold stare. "I'm Harriet," she said warmly, extending a mitten-covered hand. "I live in the blue cabin just over there. I heard about last night's excitement and, well, I just wanted to apologize for Denise's behavior." Finally, someone normal. I shook her hand and replied, "I'm Lucas Sterling. And honestly, I'm not even sure what I did to set her off. I just came home from a business trip." Harriet shook her head with a look of quiet sympathy. "Oh dear, you didn't do anything wrong. She changed after her husband died. Controlling, paranoid. It's been getting worse every month." That actually explained a lot. Grief can twist people up inside, make them act out in strange and sometimes destructive ways. But Denise's behavior felt like something more than just grief. It felt calculated. "Has she always been the HOA president?" I asked, genuinely curious. Harriet sighed softly, the kind of sigh that carries a year's worth of drama in one breath. "She took over about a year after Richard passed. Said she wanted to honor his memory by keeping the neighborhood exactly how he would have wanted it." Then she paused. "But Richard was a kind man. Gentle. Fair. He would have been horrified by how she treats people now. She's suspicious of everyone, especially anyone new. You're the first person to move in here in over 2 years, and I think your arrival really rattled her." We talked a little longer, and Harriet shared more about the unspoken rules and quiet tensions that ran through the neighborhood like underground currents. From the sound of it, Denise had basically crowned herself queen of the HOA, ruling not with kindness or logic, but with suspicion and fear, and apparently, I'd just become her latest target, and no one dared question her rule. Most people just went along with it, choosing quiet compliance over the headache of conflict. When I got back to my cabin later that day, I found 3 more emails waiting in my inbox. Email number 15 was the one that made me stop in my tracks. Final warning: compliance with all HOA regulations is mandatory. Failure to address violations within 24 hours will result in serious consequences. This is not a request. Serious consequences for parking 2 inches too close to the curb. At that point, I wasn't just annoyed, I was starting to think Denise might actually be unwell. But then I remembered her reaction when she saw my federal ID. That wasn't anger or embarrassment, that was fear. Real, visceral fear. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about HOA regulations or late night noise complaints. There was something else going on beneath the surface, and like it or not, I'd stumbled straight into the middle of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the tension, or maybe just the weird energy of being back in a place I hadn't seen in 6 months. But I found myself standing by the window around 11:30 p.m., looking out at the darkness beyond the trees. What I saw made my stomach drop. Denise was outside, sneaking through the snow-covered lot between our cabins near the lake shore. She had a small flashlight in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other, moving slowly and carefully like she was trying not to be seen. This wasn't a nighttime stroll or some innocent walk in the woods. She was looking for something. Her eyes kept darting to the paper, then to the ground, then back again. She'd walk a few steps, stop, shine the light at the snow, and then repeat. She looked desperate, frantic, like someone searching for something buried, or trying to hide something she couldn't afford for anyone else to find. And at that moment, watching her creep through the trees like a ghost on a mission, I knew. This wasn't about being a difficult neighbor anymore. Denise H.O.A. was scared, deeply, genuinely scared, and now I couldn't help but wonder what exactly she was hiding. She wasn't just pacing around aimlessly, she was out there looking for something important, something she believed was hidden in the snow-covered ground between our cabins. That's when it really hit me. Maybe all this harassment, all the obsessive HOA nitpicking, had nothing to do with noise or lighting or parking. Maybe it was a smokescreen for something deeper, something she was terrified I'd stumble across. The next morning confirmed my suspicions with email number 18, violation notice. Excessive window lighting during quiet hours disturbs neighborhood tranquility. She was now complaining about me looking out my own window. At that point, I genuinely considered selling the cabin. I'd bought this place to escape the chaos of my high-pressure job, not to get pulled into whatever unhinged drama my neighbor was dragging me into. But then I remembered what Harriet had said, how no one stood up to Denise anymore, how people had just learned to keep their heads down to avoid her wrath. Maybe that was exactly the problem. Maybe she'd gotten so comfortable with everyone backing down that she believed intimidation was all it took to control the neighborhood. That evening, as I was making dinner, I saw Denise again through the window. This time, she had a new tool in hand, a small handheld device that looked suspiciously like a metal detector. She moved slowly, deliberately, sweeping the lot near the lake in tight, focused patterns, checking the ground every few steps. She wasn't just desperate now. She was methodical, like time was running out and she knew it. Whatever she was looking for, it mattered deeply to her. And judging by her behavior, she thought I was a threat to finding it. That's when I knew. This wasn't just obsessive HOA behavior or a neighborhood control freak on a power trip. Denise was searching for something buried, something valuable or dangerous, and for whatever reason, she believed I might interfere. The next morning, any illusion of peace shattered when I opened my inbox to find a new email. Urgent community, HOA meeting scheduled for today at 7 p.m. Subject. Serious violations requiring immediate community action. All residents must attend. And just like that, whatever game Denise was playing was about to go public. This wasn't just another violation notice. This was Denise going nuclear. She was escalating our strange little Cold War into a full-blown public conflict, dragging it out of her inbox and into the spotlight of a community-wide meeting. And I had a gut feeling this wasn't going to be some friendly neighborhood chat about lawn care. What was she going to say? That I was a criminal for coming home at 2 a.m.? That my porch light was endangering the purity of mountain atmosphere? Looking back, I should have seen it coming. I spent the day bracing for whatever she had planned, printing out my property deed, mortgage documents, federal ID, anything, and everything that proved I belonged here. But the truth was, I had no idea what I was walking into. I'd never been to an HOA meeting in my life. Was this going to be a formal hearing? A neighborhood tribunal? Or just Denise standing up and hurling accusations while the rest of the residents nodded in blind agreement? I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, but something about her behavior, especially the late-night digging, the frantic energy, told me this was about more than rules and regulations. At 6:45 p.m., I walked over to the small community center near the lake, which looked like it hadn't been updated since the Nixon administration. As soon as I stepped inside, the tension was thick. 8 residents sat scattered across cheap folding chairs, every head turning to look at me with a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and quiet judgment. I spotted Harriet, who gave me a small but encouraging smile, but the rest were strangers, all watching me like I was already on trial. At the front of the room, standing stiffly behind a card table that doubled as a podium, was Denise H.O.A. But this wasn't the frazzled woman from the night before, sneaking around in a robe with a flashlight. No, this Denise was dressed for. Wore navy blue power suit, pearl necklace, hair pulled into a severe bun, the very image of HOA authority. She looked like she was about to run a corporate audit. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice cool and commanding, and just like that, the game was officially on to her as Denise's voice carried that same cold, commanding tone I'd first heard through the phone speaker. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, with the forced calm of someone preparing to stir chaos. "We have a serious situation that requires immediate community attention." Then she pointed directly at me, like a prosecutor calling out a defendant. "As you know, we've had a new resident move into the Sterling cabin. While we always welcome new neighbors, there have been several concerning incidents that affect our community's safety and tranquility." "Several concerning incidents?" I thought. "Lady, the only real incident was you calling the cops on me for unlocking my own front door," but she was just getting warmed up. "First," she continued, "there have been multiple violations of our community standards: improper parking, excessive lighting, and failure to maintain property according to HOA guidelines." She held up a thick stack of papers, undoubtedly the same bizarre email violations she'd been bombarding me with for days. Then she pivoted, eyes narrowing as her voice took on a darker tone. "More concerning, however, is Mr. Sterling's lifestyle, which appears to be secretive. He arrives at odd hours. Nobody knows exactly what he does for work. His behavior patterns are inconsistent with the peaceful values we've worked so hard to maintain here." I blinked in disbelief. "Secretive lifestyle? I travel for work. I don't broadcast my schedule on the community bulletin board," but apparently, that was enough to raise alarms. It was absurd, flattering, in a weird way, but absolutely insane. And then she dropped the bombshell. Furthermore, when I attempted to address these concerns directly with Mr. Sterling, he became hostile and threatening. He claimed to have special privileges because of his government connections and implied that normal community rules don't apply to him. The room fell completely silent. I could feel the shift instantly, dozens of eyes zeroing in on me like I'd just confirmed their worst suspicions. That was her strategy: make me look like some arrogant federal spook who thought he was above the law. It was brilliant, in a twisted, manipulative way, because it played perfectly into every suburban fear about government overreach and shadowy authority figures. And the worst part? Some people were nodding. I saw one of the board members lean over and whisper to the woman next to him. Their eyes locked on me like I was already guilty. Him. Another resident across the room was glaring at me like I'd just confessed to espionage. Even Harriet, kind, supportive Harriet, looked torn between concern and confusion. Denise had spent days carefully weaving this narrative, drip-feeding suspicion into the neighborhood until it hardened into belief. And now she was presenting it like a case file to people who barely knew me. I knew I had to speak up, but I also knew I had to tread carefully. If I came across as defensive or combative, I'd only confirm the image she was trying to sell. So I stood up slowly, forcing myself to breathe, to project calm confidence rather than the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrow," I began, my voice steady. "I'd like to clarify a few things, if I may." The room went still, so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. "My name is Lucas Sterling. I own the cabin. I work in federal security. That's it." I looked around the room, pausing on each face, trying to make a human connection beyond the shadow Denise had cast. "I understand Mrs. Harrow's concerns about community standards, and I'm more than willing to address any legitimate issues. However, I want to be absolutely clear. I've never been hostile or threatening to anyone. My only intention is to be a good neighbor and contribute positively to this community." I could feel the energy in the room start to shift. Some of the tension deflated, a few nods, a few softened expressions. But Denise wasn't about to let me regain control. "What about the unauthorized surveillance equipment?" she snapped, her voice rising with theatrical urgency. "I've detected electronic devices around your property that could be monitoring our activities." That one caught me off guard, not because it was new, but because of how intensely specific it was. I hadn't installed any surveillance equipment. I told her that clearly in my email replies. But now, watching the fire in her eyes, hearing the tremble of something deeper than HOA rage in her voice, I started to wonder, was this accusation really about me, or was she projecting her own fears onto me? "Mrs. Harrow," I said evenly, "I haven't installed any surveillance equipment. None." If you're seeing any electronic devices, it's probably just my motion sensor lights or the basic security features that came with the cabin. Nothing unusual. I paused for a moment, then decided to test the waters. If security was such a concern for the neighborhood, maybe I could offer some helpful safety tips from my own work experience. I even offered to do a basic security assessment of the area, just to help identify any potential weak points. The reaction was instant and strangely intense. The moment I mentioned scanning the area for unusual activity, Denise practically leapt out of her chair, blurting, "No, I mean, that's not necessary. This neighborhood is very safe. We don't need any kind of investigation or assessment." Her response was so over the top that the entire room went silent. Every pair of eyes suddenly fixed on her. In that awkward moment, it hit me. This wasn't about general privacy concerns. Denise wasn't just uncomfortable. She was scared, genuinely terrified of the idea that someone with a security background might start looking too closely. But why? What could she possibly be hiding that would make her react like that? The meeting ended on a tense note, with Denise quickly gathering her papers and avoiding eye contact, while the other residents left quietly, whispering among themselves about her bizarre reaction. Just as I was leaving, one of the board members pulled me aside and said, "Lucas, I just want to say I'm sorry. Denise has been on edge for weeks. Most of us go along with her to avoid conflict. But tonight, that wasn't normal. She completely freaked out when you offered to help." I nodded, thanked him, and headed back home, but something didn't sit right with me. It felt like I had unknowingly scratched the surface of something much bigger than a few HOA complaints. Denise wasn't just trying to keep me in line. She was desperately trying to keep me away from something. And now, I was starting to think that maybe I really should investigate. The next morning, as I stood in the kitchen brewing my coffee, a soft knock interrupted the quiet. Nothing like the sharp, authoritative banging I'd come to associate with Denise, but a delicate, hesitant tap that made me pause. Curious, I peered through the peephole and was stunned to see her standing there, looking nothing like her usual polished self. Gone were the pearls and pressed suits, replaced by rumpled jeans, disheveled hair, and eyes shadowed by exhaustion and sorrow. When I opened the door, she met my gaze with a look I'd never seen from her, an unexpected blend of vulnerability and desperation. "Lucas, may I come in? I need to talk to you," she whispered, her voice trembling with something raw and unfiltered. I froze, unsure if this was some elaborate manipulation or a moment of genuine collapse. But the weight she carried in her posture and the crack in her voice felt too real to ignore. "Of course. Come in," I replied, stepping aside. She moved, slowly, sitting down on the couch like someone who had been holding themselves together for far too long, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a crumpled tissue. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice fragile. "I'm so sorry about the calls, the emails, the meeting. I know I've been completely out of line. I've been acting like a lunatic." Her eyes welled up with tears as she looked at me. "Ever since Richard passed away, I've been unraveling. That was 3 years ago, and since then I've become paranoid, seeing threats that aren't there, suspecting people of things they haven't done. I've tried to stay in control by controlling everything around me, and it's been unfair to you, to the neighbors, to everyone." I stood there quietly, taking it all in, floored by the raw honesty of the woman who had, until yesterday, seemed like an immovable force of hostility and suspicion. "I understand grief can make people act in ways they normally wouldn't," I said carefully, choosing my words with a mix of compassion and honesty. "Losing someone you love, it changes everything. It's one of the hardest things a person can go through. But Denise, some of your behavior has been, well, honestly, pretty extreme. The nonstop emails, the police calls, the way you lashed out at the meeting." She nodded quickly, wiping at her damp eyes with shaking fingers. I know. I've been horrible. It's just, after Richard died, everything fell apart. This neighborhood, this street, these houses, they're all I have left of him. When you moved in, a stranger, someone unfamiliar, I panicked. I thought that if I could control everything around me, if I could keep everything exactly the same, then maybe I could hold on to him, keep a piece of him alive. Her voice cracked again, but then her tone shifted sharply, laced now with something urgent, almost pleading. "Can you forgive me? Can you please just let this all go? I'll stop everything. The emails, the notices, the veiled threats. I'll even resign from the HOA if that's what it takes. Just, please don't. Investigate anything else. Don't dig into anything. Don't assess the security system. Don't ask questions about the neighborhood. Please. And there it was again, buried under her apology, the same desperate fear I had seen last night. It was clearer now that her remorse was real, but it wasn't the full story. She wasn't just sorry. She was afraid, deeply afraid that I might uncover something. Denise, I said gently, keeping my voice calm, I'm not investigating anything. I just want to live peacefully in my cabin, enjoy some quiet, and stay out of everyone's way. I'm not here to stir up drama or invade anyone's privacy. But she didn't look relieved. If anything, she looked more agitated, like my words hadn't convinced her at all. Her eyes searched mine with growing desperation, and she leaned in slightly, about to say something else, but then hesitated, as if struggling with a decision too big to say out loud. You mentioned checking for unusual activity, doing security assessments. You work for the government. You have access to resources, databases, investigative tools, she said, her voice growing sharper with each word, the panic creeping back into her tone like a wave pulling in under a storm. You don't understand, she continued, eyes wide and wild. There are things here that shouldn't be disturbed, things that need to stay buried. That phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. Things that need to stay buried. And from the way she said it, the intensity in her eyes, I knew she didn't mean it metaphorically. I remembered the strange movement I'd caught in the middle of the night, the way she always seemed to be lurking near the woods, and for the first time, I seriously began to consider the possibility that Denise was speaking literally. When her plea didn't have the effect she wanted, her demeanor shifted like a switch had been flipped, her face hardened, her voice turned cold, and suddenly, the old Denise was back. You work for the government, so you should understand, she said, voice low but edged with menace. Some secrets need to stay secret. There are things in this neighborhood, about the past, that could cause serious problems if they ever came to light. Problems for important people. People who don't take kindly to strangers poking around where they don't belong. I just stared at her, stunned, trying to process what I was hearing. Important people? Secrets? This was supposed to be a sleepy mountain town, not the setting of some shadowy conspiracy thriller. What are you talking about, Denise? What secrets? What are you so afraid of? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but the question only agitated her more. Her hands clenched, her eyes darting toward the window as if someone might be watching. You don't need to know, she snapped. You don't need to know anything except this. Sell that cabin. Get out of here. Find somewhere else to live. Somewhere else to relax. Just go. This neighborhood isn't right for you, she said sharply, standing up with sudden force and pacing across my living room like a caged animal backed into a corner. I'm protecting you. All of us. You just don't see it yet. But if you keep pushing, if you keep asking questions, if you keep threatening to investigate, there will be consequences, serious consequences. Her voice was trembling now, not with weakness, but with something darker, fear wrapped in menace. And before I could respond, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her, leaving me frozen in place, heart pounding, and for the first time since moving here, genuinely unsure who the real threat was. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable roar of heavy machinery. Not the casual hum of a lawn mower or the distant rattle of a delivery truck, but the deep, metallic groan of something powerful tearing into the earth. I rushed to my window and saw an excavator rumbling through the empty lot beside my cabin, with Denise standing nearby, clutching what looked suspiciously like the same hand-drawn paper she'd been carrying during her late-night excursions. A construction crew was digging near my property line, and Denise was overseeing the operation with laser focus, pacing and pointing as they worked with disturbing precision. Something felt off. This wasn't routine maintenance. I threw on a hoodie and jeans and made my way over, trying to keep my voice steady. Denise, what's going on here? She didn't even look at me. Water pipe repair, she said flatly. There was a leak detected during our inspection. We have to fix it before it causes flooding. But I wasn't buying it, not for a second. I'd done enough contracting work in the past to recognize that this wasn't how you repair underground plumbing. They weren't following utility lines. The machinery wasn't right for pipe work. There were no markings, no safety flags, and the crew wasn't using any of the tools you'd expect for a legitimate repair. No, they weren't fixing anything. They were searching, and they were using that strange map of hers to guide them. I didn't report a leak, I said firmly, watching one of the workers dig deeper into the frozen ground with mechanical precision. And I haven't noticed any issues with the water pressure or signs of flooding. Flooding or water damage in the area. Denise finally looked up at me, and for a fleeting second, the desperation behind her eyes was impossible to miss. It was an HOA routine inspection, she said quickly, her voice tight. We're required to check for potential problems before they become emergencies. But her explanation didn't hold water, literally or figuratively. HOA inspections don't involve excavators tearing through frozen ground, and if there really were a leak, the utility company would be the one handling it, not a mystery crew she'd apparently hired on her own. I stood there, watching her pace beside the pit like a frantic treasure hunter, guiding the workers with that same hand-drawn map, and I had to ask myself the question that was burning in my brain. Would you stay quiet or dig for the truth if you were in my shoes? Because this had nothing to do with water pipes or HOA maintenance violations. Denise was hunting for something specific, something she was terrified I might find first. Her veiled threats, the cryptic warnings about powerful people and serious consequences, they weren't empty. This went far beyond neighborhood politics, and as I watched her motion for the crew to dig even deeper, something inside me shifted. I realized it was time to stop playing the passive neighbor and start acting like what I was, a trained investigator. Whatever she was looking for, it was important enough to break laws, risk lawsuits, and unravel her own carefully maintained persona. So I called my lawyer and explained everything, what I'd witnessed, what I suspected, and what I needed to do. His advice was clear: document every detail, demand an explanation, and if none came, file a formal complaint and involve the police. I hung up and called Denise directly, keeping my voice calm but firm. You have 24 hours to stop the digging and explain exactly what you're looking for, or I'm filing a lawsuit and requesting a full police investigation into your activities. Silence. For a long, tense moment, there was nothing but static on the other end. And then, in a trembling whisper, she said, "You can't do that. You don't understand. This goes way beyond HOA drama. If you bring the police into this, if you open an investigation, people will get hurt. Important people. People with the power to make your life very, very difficult." But I wasn't buying her vague, recycled threats anymore. "Then help me understand, Denise," I said firmly. "Tell me what's really going on here, or I'm making that call." There was another pause, heavier than the last, and I could hear her breathing hard through the line, like she was fighting an invisible weight pressing down on her. I can't tell you," she said, voice cracking. "But please, trust me, sell the cabin and leave. It's for your own good." That was the last thing she said before hanging up. Hours passed, the silence of the night thick around me, and then, close to midnight, my phone rang again. It was Denise, but her voice this time was different. Not angry, not threatening, just defeated, worn out, maybe even relieved. "Lucas, can you meet me at the digging site? I'll tell you everything. I can't keep doing this anymore." Every instinct in me screamed that it could be a trap, but there was something in her voice, something honest, that told me otherwise. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out into the cold, the wind sharp against my face as I crossed the dark path toward the now abandoned lot. The site looked like the aftermath of a forgotten archaeological dig, and Denise, she looked like the ghost who'd dug it. She wore the same plain clothes from her apology, but now her entire body sagged with exhaustion. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes sunken and vacant, and she clutched that crumpled map like it was her lifeline. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, barely audible above the wind. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm going to tell you the truth. All of it." I stood silently under the pale moonlight, surrounded by half-dug trenches and frozen earth, waiting as she took a trembling breath and began to speak. Richard worked for Mountain Resort Development. The company was dirty, stealing millions. From federal contracts, rerouting funds, burying paperwork. He stumbled onto it. He started collecting proof. And then, just like that, he was dead. Her voice faltered, and she looked down at the paper in her hands like it held the past. in its folds. 4 years ago, Richard discovered something that should have stayed buried, but he believed in doing what was right. And I think they killed him for it. Over $2 million, maybe more, she said, her voice shaking as the tears ran freely down her face. They were billing for work that never happened, inflating costs, fabricating entire expense. Reports. It wasn't just fraud, it was federal-level crime, organized and deliberate. Suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't some bitter HOA feud or paranoid neighbor drama. This was the unraveling of something huge. Richard was a good man, she continued, choking on the words. When he found out what they were doing, he didn't hesitate. He started making copies of internal files, documenting everything, building a case. But someone must have found out, because that's when the threat started. They followed him, watched us, let him know that if he went to the authorities, there would be consequences. She looked up at me with haunted, sunken eyes. He wasn't scared for himself, he was scared for me. So he backed up everything, all. The files, the reports, onto a drive. Then he buried it here, in this lot. She lifted the crumpled paper in her hand. He drew this map and told me that if anything ever happened to him, I had to use it, to expose the truth, to finish what he started. I stared at her, the weight of her words settling deep into my chest. But then he died, I said quietly. She nodded. Heart attack, right at his desk. The doctors blamed stress, but her voice trailed off, and I could see the doubt. No, the suspicion, burning behind her eyes. For 3 years, I've lived in fear, she whispered. Scared that if anyone from Mountain Resort Development suspected that Richard kept evidence, they'd come after me. I've been searching for that drive every night, because it's the only thing that can prove what really happened, and maybe, just maybe, give his death some kind of meaning. I stood there, staring at this woman who had been carrying a silent war on her shoulders for 3 years, and suddenly, all of her erratic behavior, all the hostility, the surveillance paranoia, made perfect sense. When you showed up, she said, her voice turning bitter with irony, with your federal ID and your background in cybersecurity. I thought, she laughed weakly, almost angrily, I thought they'd sent you. I thought the government already knew about the fraud, she said quietly, her voice raw. I thought you were here to find the evidence, to investigate me as an accomplice. I was terrified you'd dig up what Richard hid, and that I'd be arrested, or worse. And just like that, it all made sense. The paranoia, the late-night digging, the frantic emails and the panic at the meeting. She hadn't been trying to hide something from me. She'd been trying to protect herself from what she thought I already knew. I stared at her, thinking about all the wild neighbor stories I'd heard over the years, on forums, online videos, channels that thrive on suburban drama. But this was something else entirely. Denise, I said gently, I had no idea about any of this. I really am just a guy who wanted a quiet place to relax. I'm not here to investigate fraud or hunt for evidence. I just wanted a peaceful cabin in the woods, to come home from work without being treated like a suspect. She looked at me then, with a mix of disbelief and something that resembled relief, like maybe, for the first time in years, someone actually believed her. But now you know, she whispered. Now you know what I've been hiding, what I've been looking for. And I still haven't found it. 3 years of searching, and I still don't know exactly where Richard buried that drive. I glanced around the torn-up lot, the muddy trenches, the abandoned machinery, all physical proof of her quiet obsession, and I felt something shift in me. Pity? Empathy? Maybe both. This woman had been trapped in her own private nightmare. For 3 long years, driven by grief, fear, and a need to make her husband's death mean something. I stood there, under the pale moonlight, beside a woman whose life had been consumed by secrets, asking myself the only question that mattered. Would you help or walk away if you were me? Sure, she'd made my life miserable for a week. She'd called the police on me, bombarded me with threats and HOA nonsense. But she'd also been terrified of me, of what I might uncover, of what powerful people might do if she failed to stop them. She wasn't some villain terrorizing the neighborhood. She was just someone left behind in the aftermath of something massive and dangerous, trying to survive it the only way she knew how. And for the first time, I saw her not as a threat, but as another victim of a truth that refused to stay buried. And maybe I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I decided it was time to step forward, to take control of a situation that had spiraled too far into secrecy and fear. I called an emergency HOA meeting, not to defend myself, but to expose the truth. This time, it wasn't about my property lines or noise complaints. It was about fraud, harassment, and the truth buried beneath our feet. I had everything: video evidence of the unauthorized digging, a paper trail of Denise's emails and complaints, and most importantly, her own confession about the cover-up surrounding her husband's death and the federal contract fraud. When the 8 residents filtered into the community center, their faces were cautious, curious, and guarded. But they could tell something had shifted. Denise sat in the back corner, smaller than I'd ever seen her, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Gone was the commanding woman who had once ruled the HOA with a clipboard and a glare. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing at the front of the room. "I know tensions have been high lately, and I'd like to clear the air and explain what's really been happening." I scanned the room. Some faces that had glared at me during the last meeting now looked unsure, maybe even regretful. First, I want to address the accusations made against me. I've brought documentation proving that I am the legal owner of my cabin, that I work in federal computer security, and that I've never violated any of our community standards or regulations. I noticed one board member, previously one of Denise's most vocal allies, shift uncomfortably in their chair. But more importantly, I continued, I want to talk about Mrs. Harrow. She's been struggling since the death of her husband. And unfortunately, that grief led to behavior that was not only inappropriate, but potentially dangerous. I pulled out my phone and tapped on the video. The screen lit up with footage of the excavator tearing into the lot beside my cabin. Denise pacing in the background with her crumpled map in hand. This is video of unauthorized construction taking place on community land, without permits, without board approval, and based on a story that was entirely false. Gasps echoed around the room as the video played. One of the women who had whispered about me during the first meeting covered her mouth. The room fell into stunned silence until finally, someone asked the question everyone was thinking. "Denise, is this true? Did you really hire a construction crew to dig here? Without telling anyone? Up the neighborhood without telling anyone?" One of the residents finished, their voice sharp and accusing. Denise looked up, her face pale and hollow, eyes glinting with the weight of shame, but no words came. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed shut again, as if anything she said might only make things worse. Harriet, the sweet elderly woman who'd tried to keep the peace all week, leaned forward and spoke softly, her voice full of hurt. "Oh, Denise, why didn't you just ask for help?" But Denise didn't answer. She just stared at her trembling hands, folded tightly in her lap. Then one of the board members, a man who'd previously stood firmly in her corner, rose to his feet, face flushed with anger. "This is completely unacceptable," he said, addressing the room. "As board members, we have a duty to this community. We can't let someone in a leadership position make unilateral decisions and then lie about it to the people we represent." He turned sharply toward his fellow board members. "I move to remove Denise as president, effective immediately, and she pays for the damage to the property." There was no hesitation. The motion was seconded, voted on, and passed unanimously. Denise abstained, her silence confirming her resignation. Just like that, the reign she had held over the neighborhood for years was gone. "I need time to arrange a few things," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I think maybe I should leave. Start over somewhere else." The room sat heavy with tension as everyone processed what had just happened. The woman who once controlled every detail of their lives now couldn't even defend herself, and despite everything she'd done to me, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. She'd been trapped in a private nightmare for years, and now, in front of everyone, that nightmare had finally collapsed. After she stepped down, something in the air shifted. It was like the neighborhood could breathe again. Lights stayed on at night. Mailboxes stayed where they belonged. People stopped whispering and started waving. The tension that had once clung to every front porch, every HOA email, just lifted. And when the new HOA president was elected, they promised a return to common sense governance. No more nitpicking, no more intimidation, just reasonable oversight and an actual focus on community. It felt like the end of a long, punishing storm, and The beginning of something better. Denise was moving to Arizona. Harriet, ever the gentle voice of reason, said she needed a reset and some real distance from everything. And honestly, she was right. I felt terrible for her, truly, but at the same time, I couldn't deny the overwhelming sense of relief. The last few years had been nothing but stress with Denise at the helm of the HOA. Everyone living under the constant anxiety of what absurd rule or spontaneous inspection might come next. I watched her from across the street as she packed up, her belongings quietly slipping out of the life she'd once micromanaged, avoiding eye contact with every neighbor she'd once controlled. It was hard not to feel conflicted. This woman had made my life hell, but she'd also been living in one of her own, shaped by grief, fear, and isolation. The day before she left, I was out tending my garden when I noticed her standing alone by the empty lot one final time, the same worn map clutched tightly in her hand. She just stared at the torn-up earth where she'd spent countless nights digging, chasing a truth she might never fully uncover. Her shoulders sagged in quiet defeat, like someone who had finally accepted that the ghost she'd been chasing wasn't going to appear. She glanced up and caught me watching, and for the briefest moment, our eyes met. No anger, no blame, just silence, exhaustion, and maybe a flicker of gratitude, like she knew her nightmare had finally run its course. When I saw her car disappear down the mountain road the next morning, I felt a strange swirl of relief and sadness. The woman who once called the cops on me at 2 a.m., who filled my inbox with threats and chaos, who tore through our neighborhood, hunting for buried secrets, was finally gone. And for the first time since moving in, I could breathe, relax, and enjoy the quiet retreat I'd originally dreamed of. But something inside me whispered that this wasn't the end. Because while Denise had left, the real people responsible, the ones who committed the fraud, who threatened Richard, who triggered all this pain, were still out there, somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't finished yet. 3 weeks after her departure, as I was finally settling into the calm, neighborly peace of mountain life, trimming trees, sleeping through the night, walking freely without suspicion, I sat down to clean out my email inbox, ready to delete months worth of HOA madness. That's when I saw it. An old, unopened message buried beneath the digital noise, one I'd completely forgotten about until now. The message had come from Reed Keller, an old colleague who'd since climbed the ranks to become the director of the security division at our agency. The email subject line was brief and direct. Call me when you finish your Colorado project. With everything going on in that chaotic HOA situation, I'd completely forgotten to follow up. Feeling a little guilty, I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. Reed, it's Lucas Sterling. I just got around to your message about calling after I wrapped up Colorado. Took longer than expected. Life got a little messy. Reed laughed warmly on the other end. Lucas, finally. I was beginning to think you vanished. Actually, those messy complications are the exact reason I needed to talk. Something in his voice told me this wasn't just a casual check-in. What do you mean, Reed? I asked, genuinely puzzled. He didn't hesitate. I heard you took some time off out there, but word got back to me about an incident involving a local HOA president. Something about a 911 call and your federal ID being mentioned. My stomach turned. How the hell did he know about that? Reed, that was nothing more than a neighborhood misunderstanding. Just a tough neighbor and some miscommunication. It's all handled now. But he just kept chuckling, amused. Lucas, that little nothing ended up getting escalated. Local cops filed a report, said a federal agent was being hassled by an HOA resident. When that landed on my desk and your name was on it, I had to take a closer look. He paused, then continued with a thoughtful tone. What really stood out was how you handled it. No misuse of your credentials, no flexing your federal status to scare civilians, no escalation. You kept things calm, showed real restraint and sharp thinking. And that, my friend, is exactly the kind of approach we need more of. You let the situation play out without escalating it into something bigger, and even as I listened, I was still wrapping my head around the fact that my bizarre neighborhood dispute had somehow become a case study at the federal level. Reed, I wasn't trying to handle anything professionally, I admitted, half laughing. I just wanted to sleep in my own house without getting arrested. But Reed's tone shifted. He sounded energized. Exactly my point, Lucas. You were under pressure, facing a completely unreasonable neighbor throwing false accusations your way. And instead of turning it into a federal standoff, you kept your cool and solved it without creating fallout for anyone. That's real leadership. He paused just long enough to make me curious. There's a new division forming. I had no clue what he was getting at, but it was clear now. This was more than a friendly check-in. Our domestic security division is expanding, he continued. We need team leads who know how to navigate messy, unpredictable situations, working with civilians, local law enforcement, and potential security threats. We need people who can manage complex issues without waving a badge around or setting off alarm bells. His tone had shifted again, more deliberate now, like he was laying out something critical. That whole HOA mess. It was like an unplanned job interview, Lucas. You didn't blow your cover, didn't provoke anyone, and managed to work with local police to bring it all to a quiet resolution. That's rare, and it's exactly what we need in someone who'll be leading teams through sensitive domestic operations. I sat in silence for a second, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. Reed, I wasn't chasing a new job, I said honestly. I just wanted a peaceful break in my cabin without being stalked by a nosy neighbor. But he wasn't done yet. This position comes with more than just responsibility. It includes a major promotion, a salary bump, and the chance to handpick and lead your own team. You'd be protecting national infrastructure, investigating emerging threats, and collaborating with local agencies across the country. For someone with your background, this isn't just an offer. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Over the past few weeks, I found myself reflecting on how a seemingly minor neighborhood dispute had unexpectedly revealed something deeper. My ability to navigate complex, high-pressure human situations with calm and precision. You spotted fraud, handled a volatile individual, and kept the whole thing quiet, Reed continued, his voice steady with conviction. That's incredibly rare. You uncovered potential criminal behavior, dealt with someone who was clearly unstable, protected an entire neighborhood, and did it all without filing a single incident report or triggering a federal inquiry. You took what could have been a public disaster and turned it into a silent success story. That's the kind of leadership we desperately need. I couldn't deny it. He made it sound compelling. Still, my thoughts drifted to Denise and the cost she paid for chasing the truth. Something about her situation didn't sit right. Reed, I said cautiously, what if I told you there's more to what happened in Colorado? What if real crimes were being committed beneath the surface? His response came instantly, without hesitation. Even better, if you can detect criminal activity while maintaining your cover as a civilian, that makes you even more valuable. We're building teams that can spot emerging threats before they spiral out of control. That's the kind of instinct we need. I turned to gaze out the window, taking in the calm, glassy surface of the mountain lake. The very reason I'd come here in the first place. I had no idea this peaceful escape would become the gateway to the biggest professional leap of my life. This is a lot to take in, Reed. Can I have a day or two to think it over? I asked, though deep down, I already knew my answer. This was the kind of work I was built for. And somehow, without even trying, I'd proven I was ready. The next morning, as I stood in my driveway with my bags packed and the mountain air cool against my skin, I asked myself one final question. If you were me, would you say yes or no? But I already had. The lakeside cabin would remain my escape, my quiet space to reset, but my purpose had shifted. I had accepted Reed's offer, and soon I'd be on my way back to DC, stepping into a leadership role where I'd be protecting critical infrastructure, identifying domestic threats, and managing the unpredictable human factors that come with both. As I loaded the last box into my car, I couldn't help but replay the strange, winding chain of events that had brought me to this point, all starting with one difficult neighbor. Over the past few weeks, I found myself reflecting on how a seemingly minor neighborhood dispute had unexpectedly revealed something deeper, my ability to navigate complex, high-pressure human situations with calm and precision. You spotted fraud, handled a volatile individual, and kept the whole thing quiet. Reed continued, his voice steady with conviction. That's incredibly rare. You uncovered potential criminal behavior, dealt with someone who was clearly unstable, protected an entire neighborhood, and did it all without filing a single incident report or triggering a federal inquiry. You took what could have been a public disaster and turned it into a silent success story. That's the kind of leadership we desperately need. I couldn't deny it. He made it sound compelling. Still, my thoughts drifted to Denise and the cost she paid for chasing the truth. Something about her situation didn't sit right. "Reed," I said cautiously, "what if I told you there's more to what happened in Colorado? What if real crimes were being committed beneath the surface?" His response came instantly, without hesitation. "Even better, if you can detect criminal activity while maintaining your cover as a civilian, that makes you even more valuable. We're building teams that can spot emerging threats before they spiral out of control. That's the kind of instinct we need." I turned to gaze out the window, taking in the calm, glassy surface of the mountain lake, the very reason I'd come here in the first place. I had no idea this peaceful escape would become the gateway to the biggest professional leap of my life. "This is a lot to take in, Reed. Can I have a day or two to think it over?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew my answer. This was the kind of work I was built for. And somehow, without even trying, I'd proven I was ready. The next morning, as I stood in my driveway with my bags packed and the mountain air cool against my skin, I asked myself one final question. If you were me, would you say yes or no? But I already had. The lakeside cabin would remain my escape, my quiet space to reset, but my purpose had shifted. I had accepted Reed's offer, and soon I'd be on my way back to DC, stepping into a leadership role where I'd be protecting critical infrastructure, identifying domestic threats, and managing the unpredictable human factors that come with both. As I loaded the last box into my car, I couldn't help but replay the strange, winding chain of events that had brought me to this point. All starting with one difficult neighbor, a midnight harassment call, a hidden computer drive, and somehow, all of it spiraled into a promotion that would change the entire course of my career. As I stood one last time, looking at the now empty lot where Denise had once spent countless desperate hours digging for her husband's lost evidence, the full irony sank in. Her obsessive fear of being investigated had accidentally become the perfect showcase for my own investigative instincts. Her deep mistrust of federal agents had, in a twist of fate, helped shape me into a better one. Every attempt she made to drive me away had instead propelled me straight into the kind of opportunity most agents only dream of. Maybe she was finally at peace out in Arizona. Maybe she'd let go of Richard's shadow and started rebuilding her life. As I pulled away from the mountain cabin, I couldn't help but laugh softly at how bizarre the whole journey had been. If someone had told me a run-in with a Karen in a quiet Colorado neighborhood would be the launching point for my biggest career move yet, I would have rolled my eyes. But now I just nod, because sometimes it's the most unexpected, absurd situations that reveal exactly what you're capable of. Maybe, in some strange way, Denise and I both ended up right where we were meant to be. And hey, if you're still here, still listening, thank you for sticking through the ride. If there's one thing I've learned, it's to trust your gut. What seems like small-town noise, like just another angry neighbor with a clipboard, might be hiding something real underneath. I never intended to get involved. I didn't want to play detective. But life has this funny habit of dragging you right into the heart of stories you never meant to join. If any of this felt familiar, or even made you take a second look at your own HOA, tap that like button, leave a comment, or subscribe for more Q stories. I read every single one of your replies, and honestly, they're what fuel all of this. And if you're feeling generous, you can hit the thanks button to help keep things running. No pressure,